Look at all our punctual attendees here. All right. I'm sure we'll have some latecomers. We had around 29 registered last I checked, and we've got 14 in here right now. So we'll start with the introductions, and I'll type the rest of this out for people that are coming later on. But welcome to today's first ever virtual state and regional workshop. Special thanks to Michelle Kelly for setting this up. Before we get started with introductions, I just wanted to cover, technically speaking, how we're going to use this platform today to kind of maximize the amount of interaction we can get. So if you've joined us for any webinar or coffee talk in the past 6 months, then you're probably already pretty familiar with your options. But your cameras and microphones are muted by default. So there's 3 main ways you can interact. The first is through the chat. You can use the chat for general discussion or comments. Just make sure if you want everyone to see what you've written, that you select all panelists and attendees from the drop-down. Otherwise, only the panelists will see what's there. The second option is Q&A, and we're really going to try to encourage you to use this if you're not comfortable speaking. And the reason why is everyone will be able to see any question that's been asked or any comment that's been posted for that matter. And you can add your own comments to those and you can upvote them. So it's a really good way of kind of keeping threaded discussion in order. And also it helps us figure out what's been addressed already and what still needs to be gotten to. The final way, if you're comfortable speaking, is to raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, I'll go in and unmute you and announce that you're unmuted. You'll still likely have to unmute yourself, but you'll be able to speak at that point. So those are the 3 main ways you can interact, and you can use any of them. But if you're just going to want to type, then Q&A is probably your best bet. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to President Jack Miner. Jack?
Thanks, Mike. Again, I want to welcome everybody. Some of you know me. I'm actually watching the attendees roll in, and I'm actually seeing a lot of familiar names and people that I miss seeing. But some of you don't know me. I'm Jack Miner. I am president of the board of directors for AACRAO. I'm also vice provost for enrollment management at University of Cincinnati. And I want to welcome you today. I want to thank all of our panelists, and we'll talk about who they are in a minute. I want to especially thank Mike Sisson, though. He does really incredible work keeping all of us on track and making sure that we have great technical support. And that's really been so incredible for us from an AACRAO standpoint, and being able to make sure that we continue to deliver content that's important to our members. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you for participating today. You know, this is a really incredible leadership opportunity for you. I know all of you are on boards and volunteers at your state or regional organization, but I also want to thank you for the service that you're providing to the people within your state or region. And I don't want you to take that for granted. You know, think for a minute about the people that you serve, the organizations that you serve, the schools that you serve, and really reflect on many of those, if not all of those, don't have the resources right now to be able to travel to a national conference. They don't have the resources to be able to connect with others in the way that they're able to connect through your state group or regional group. The other piece that I think is really important is when we think about our professions, so much of what we end up receiving as training and as professional development is really specific to software. And one of the things that all of us end up doing is we're providing professional development support specific to our discipline and specific to the career. So think about the opportunities that you're giving people to really advance their career, to think about what they want to do with the rest of their lives, how they want to engage with their university. And again, that's so different than the other professional development opportunities that we have. You have some really incredible presenters today. Steve, Texas, and Carol are not just incredible experts, but they're really just terrific, terrific folks. I love AACRAO, and I love AACRAO because of the relationships. And these three folks are literally some of the favorite people that I've been able to work with in my 25 years with AACRAO. So really quickly to do introductions, Stephen Smith is University Registrar at Delphi University, a really, really phenomenal leader within AACRAO. Carol Harrison, again, a great leader within AACRAO. The two of them have been really phenomenal leaders within state regionals. Carol is Interim Dean of Enrollment of Enrollment Services and Registrar at the College of Southern Maryland. And then Texas Rugg is somebody who is a really phenomenal leader within AACRAO and helps coordinate a number of the things that we do within the organization for state and regionals. Has really played that role for us over the last couple of years. I think that really prepped him to be on this panel. He's registrar at LeTourneau University. So again, three really phenomenal presenters. Before we kick off today, this opportunity and this training really grew out of some work that Steve had done with a task force that the board created, and also with a publication that AACRAO recently put out that talks about the administration of state and regional organizations. So to start with, I want to kick off with a little video that gives some history of that. So a huge thanks to Steve for an adorable, adorable video, but also a huge thanks to Steve and Patty for running the work group and for putting together the publication. And again, what we wanted to create with that was twofold. We wanted to create something that would serve as a resource for state and regional organizations and something that you can kind of have on the shelf and reach for when you've got a question. But we also knew that it would be a living document. We knew that it would be an opportunity to create new conversations and to really promote opportunities like this where you can learn from each other. So as we kick off and talk a little bit about the agenda today, if you can flip the slide. As we talk about the agenda today, one of the things that I really want all of you to focus on is this is not meant to just be a lecture. This is absolutely meant to be an opportunity for all of you to share with each other. And this will absolutely be only as strong as all of you make it. This is an opportunity for you to share ideas. All of us got to where we are because of being in leadership roles at some point in state and regionals and kind of doing work along the way. And we are absolutely by no means the experts. You are the experts, and it's an opportunity for you to share with each other. And we're really here to help guide those conversations. So today we're going to do a little bit of an introduction to state and regionals. We'll first talk about organizational structure, then legal and financial matters, and then we'll do a question and answer and some facilitated conversation. We tried to do this as well with a little bit of a mixture of live as well as some recorded content. So with that, I'm going to kick off to our first presenter, Steve Smith, to talk a little bit about the first topic.
Thanks, Jack. And on behalf of the work group, thank you for all the kind words about all the work that was done for everyone or by everyone. And as the chair of the work group, I'd like to say thank you to all the authors. So a few of them are on here today, I see. So a big thank you to everyone who spent a lot of time researching and writing the chapters. But I also speak to you as an author of the first chapter, which is organizational structure, which I wrote part of. And Amy Gleason from Duke, who's also on the call, wrote part of that chapter as well. And I won't repeat everything that you're going to see in the video, but to tell you what org structure is all about, but you'll see all that in the video. But Amy and I will both be available at the end during the Q&A for any questions or any discussions. So hopefully you'll find this all very helpful.
Hi, I'm Steve Smith, the University Registrar at Adelphi University, and one of the co-authors of the Organizational Structure chapter of the State and Regional Guide. The second co-author of this chapter is Amy Gleason, who is Assistant Registrar for Compliance and Reporting at Duke University. The Organizational Structure chapter has sections that discuss mission, vision, and values, committees, sponsorships, honors and awards, constitution and bylaws, and nominations and elections. There are also 3 sections regarding the board of directors, board composition, board meetings, and the terms and duties for the board members. Amy and I researched the websites of the 29 state and regional associations to gather the information to help us determine the best practices for each of these topics. The Constitution and bylaws are the documents which govern the association. The Constitution should provide the basic outline, defining the association and determining its scope and structure. Bylaws should provide the details of how to carry out the vision established in the Constitution. This section of the guide describes the sections that should be in these documents and gives examples from the associations all around the country. For example, constitutions should identify the organization and define its purpose. The Constitution should outline who's eligible for membership in the association, while the bylaws then can provide the further details, such as the categories of membership, voting eligibility, annual dues, etc. Officers should be defined in the Constitution. Bylaws often address committees and meetings, as well as fiscal, legal, and parliamentary items. All constitutions and bylaws must describe the process by which they are amended. And typically, terms for amending the Constitution is much more strict than for amending the bylaws. A mission statement should articulate what an organization does and express the values that are important to the association. Surprisingly, we didn't find a lot of mission statements online for state and regional associations, but for those who do have mission statements online, the most common themes expressed are the promotion of higher education, the offering of professional development opportunities, networking and the exchange of ideas, and the sharing of information. A board of directors or executive board or executive committee, that's the collective group of people who oversee the activities of the association. The size of the state and regional boards range anywhere from 4 to 14 members, but the average size is 9. Ironically, or interestingly, the only position that all 29 boards have is president. Though most include a president-elect, a past president, a secretary, and a treasurer. Other positions vary by association, but can be grouped into 2 main categories, representative or functional. One type of representative board member is by job duty, while another represents a specific geographic area. Common functional board members work in areas such as membership, professional development, technology, and communications, though the guide expands on even more areas. Now, based on the 29 state and regional associations, a representative example of what a board might look like is this. This section also talks about the typical length of the terms of board members and some of the duties of most of the most common board member positions, as well as some best practices regarding meetings. Most associations have a nominations and elections committee that seeks and determines the nominees for the available board positions and oversees the elections. Quite often we found the committee is chaired by the past president, though the guide describes some variations as well as the manner in which other members of the committee are usually chosen. Committees play a vital role to the association. In addition to the nominations and elections committees, we found that the most common committees deal with conference planning, although that's often split as separate local arrangements and program committees, corporate sponsorships, budget or an audit committee, archive or history, professional development, technology, communications, high school relations, and honors and awards. While much of the support for state and regional association comes from the dues that members pay, many associations rely heavily on corporate sponsorships. The guide gives a few more details on sponsorships that vendors make to either the association or for the annual meeting. Because the state and regional associations rely almost exclusively on the work of the members who volunteer to serve the organization, it's important to recognize those commitments with honors and awards. These can come in the form of certificates and plaques to the members who serve on the board, special awards that are given to members with distinguished or exemplary service, and special awards for new members or young professionals or emerging leaders. Sometimes state and regional associations have named these awards in honor of former members. So that's the organizational structure chapter. And on behalf of Amy and myself, we hope that you find this and all the chapters of the State and Regional Guide helpful as you lead your organizations.
Carol, can't hear you right now.
Now, sorry guys.
Yep, yeah, there we go. We can hear you now.
Okay. Let me just warn my coworker in my office that I don't have I'm not muted anymore. So Daniel, I'm not muted anymore. The trials and tribulations of working remotely when your son moves back home. So hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carol Harrison. I wrote the chapter on legal and financial matters. What I attempted to do in the chapter was to write it in layman's terms. These are probably two areas that the majority of us going into a leadership position probably don't have a lot of background on. So I thought it was important to simplify it as much as possible. I know I needed that when I was an officer, and I hope I gave you some really good references that you can check out in case these are some areas that you'd like to explore as an offer of your organization. And I too, just like Jack, want to say thank you for your volunteering to help. I know it was extremely rewarding service when I was involved in AACRAO. I know I received so much more than I think I ever gave to the organization. And I also made lifelong friends who I can not only contact for issues when it comes to my institution, but just people who I just thoroughly enjoy and I feel like are family. So with that, Mike's going to start off my video on legal and financial matters, which gives you an overview of that chapter. Hello, I'm Carol Harrison from the College of Southern Maryland, and I wrote the chapter on legal and financial matters for the state and regional guide. My experience in a regional AACRAO began with assisting in the founding of AACRAO and later becoming a president of that organization. To be completely transparent, I have no legal or financial background. I have a degree in history in my undergrad, my master's was in counselor education, and I'm currently studying community college leadership in my doctoral program. But does it count that I married a finance guy? My dad has a law degree. But seriously, I begin with that background to be completely transparent and to emphasize that regardless of your education or your training background, you can navigate your organization through its needs in legal and financial matters. I myself, with the help of my treasurer, completed the paperwork for AACRAO to earn their tax-exempt status. If I can do this, anyone can. So let's begin. This chapter has 4 parts, and we're going to jump right in. So the obvious advantage to applying for tax-exempt status is that having this status will allow your organization to be free from tax at the federal, state, and local level, saving the organization thousands of dollars. This isn't a very complicated process. The IRS provides great references for you, a publication that they've developed on how to apply for this. There's a checklist for the form that you have to complete, and then also some information on applying for tax-exempt status for nonprofits. All of these are really helpful for you to get started. To begin applying for tax-exempt status, your organization has to be either a trust, a corporation, or association. And all this more than likely you have already developed when your organization was first established. When you read through some of the code, you must be one of the exempt purposes of an organization as defined by the IRS. Your organization cannot be organized or operate for the benefit of private interest, and you're restricted in how much political and legislative lobbying activities that. When you start the process, besides reading all the important information, you're going to file Form 1023. There is a fillable PDF that you can get online that's extremely helpful. Along with completing the Form 1023, there's additional information you must submit with the form: your employer identification number, articles of incorporation, trust agreement, your articles of association, constitution, bylaw, or other similar organizational documents, your purpose and dissolution clause verification, and authorized representation verification. All these things, I'm sure your organization. So once you have earned that tax exempt status from the IRS, of course, what's your next step? Required tax filings, and that's the next part of the chapter. It's important that you file your taxes every year. We all know this as an individual. Just like as an individual, if you don't file your tax returns, you will be assessed penalties. So it's definitely something you want to put on your to-do list for your treasurer. There are 3 different forms that you need to file with the IRS yearly. Which form you choose depends on the gross receipts and total assets of your organization. And there are 3 different forms that you may complete depending on your status. Also, the due date for this form depends on which form you complete. And also don't forget when putting your tax filings together that an exempt organization must make your Form 900 series available for public inspection. So the next part of the chapter talks about insurance. And as an officer of an organization, I highly recommend that you consider insurance because it's important and prudent that you protect yourself. And also as an officer, expect the unexpected, and purchasing insurance will cover any issues that could result in possible losses to your organization. So there are 2 different types of insurance that I think you should take a look at. One is called general liability insurance or commercial general liability. The other is director and offices liability. The general liability insurance policy covers typical things like bodily injury, property damage that occurs on your property or happens as a result of the operations of your organization. This policy will cover someone else's property also if there's damage to the site because of your nonprofit. The directors and officers liability policy is important to consider because this type of insurance is going to protect any member of the directors or officers group when a lawsuit is filed against one of these members. With insurance, always keep in mind that it's important to keep ourselves safe from possible litigation. Insurance isn't costly. At the time I was researching for this chapter, you're looking at anywhere from about $350 to $500 a year. So well worth the consideration for your organization. And it's very easy to find this. You just do a Google search on nonprofit insurance and you'll get tons of hits. And that's what I did when I looked into insurance for AACRAO a few years ago. It was very easy, and the nice insurance person walked me through and recommended what I should take. So please look into that for your organization. The last part of the chapter gives you some information on intellectual property. And there are 4 different areas of law when it comes to intellectual property. That is patents, trademarks, copyright, and trade secrets. These type of intellectual property provide property rights to inventors, and it also protects the inventor from infringement and other unauthorized use and misuse of your creations. So patents offers the owner the right to exclude others from making, using, or offering for sale or selling the invention. Patents are usually valid for 20 years. The owner can grant a license to others to use for the invention, typically for a fee. A good example of a patent is the iPhone. Wouldn't it have been great to have invented that? The next type of intellectual property is the trademark. A trademark is any word, name, symbol, or device which represents a company or product. A good example of a trademark is a slogan such as McDonald's, I'm loving it. Next is copyright, is a form of protection granted to an author, which is a tangible form of expression rather than, an idea or subject matter of itself. Copyright protection lasts for the lifetime of the author, plus 70 years. An example of a work that is protected under copyright law is any musical work and the accompanying words. Lastly, trade secret is a proprietary or business-related information that a company or individual uses and has exclusive rights to. Popular examples of trade secrets include the recipe for Coca-Cola or the formula for WD-40. So that is all about legal and financial matters. I hope that these highlights are going to be helpful for you as an officer in your state or regional AACRAO association. Good luck in your service to your organization. I know it was a great experience for me, and I hope you find it very rewarding also.
All right, who's up next?
I think that that concludes both of the video chapters. So I think, is this where Texas, where you will take over the Q&A portion? Should be another slide after this one, I think.
Yes, I think so. So I think we can open it up for discussion, for questions. I think we have two mechanisms for questions. One is the chat, one is the Q&A. The Q&A is really the preferred method. So please feel free to ask away all the questions you have, and we'll get the panel to answer as many of those as we can. Don't be shy.
So Texas, actually, while we're waiting to see if any questions come in, I'd like to ask everyone who's attending, if you have been able to find the video online. I did see one comment in the chat from Jonica saying that she uses the guide, that it's been helpful. So I'm just curious if people have been able to find it, if they've actually used it, and maybe what they've referenced in it, which might help others see how you've used it.
Mike, do I need to talk now? This is Chris. Am I
Chris,
muted?
yes, go ahead.
Sure. So thanks, Stephen and Carol, for your videos. It's very helpful. I guess a question for probably each of you. Steve, AACRAO, which is Illinois AACRAO, we have a bylaws, but we don't have a constitution. It's a mixture. So is that something we should consider, I guess? And then maybe for Carol, since for insurance for officers, since it's a volunteer position, is that really needed if we're just volunteer, I guess? I'm just curious about that. Anyway, just some questions on in my mind.
Yeah, great question, Chris.
All right, so for the first part, for the Constitution and bylaws, I would think it would be recommended. It's interesting to find out that, so you're saying it's just one document that is combined? Is that how it is, Chris?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Yeah, what we found as we were doing the research was that that the constitutions seemed to be a little more open and general. For example, they would state the purpose of the organization, state what happens if the organization comes to an end. It states maybe what the makeup of the board is, and things like that, and more general than
Okay.
the bylaws then would give the more detailed parts of it. So, so the Constitution would give the board, the bylaws would then say what the terms were of each, you know, how long the term of duty was for each board member, what happens if a board member vacates that position, what the duties are of that. Some of them say that certain committees report up through a certain board member. So those are the kind of things that can be changed easily. Or more easily, I should say, than a constitution. So a constitution may require a 2/3 vote of the full membership at the annual meeting to change it, where bylaws may just be a 50% vote, or may have some other kind of a more easy a way to change it more easily. But that's what I found when I was doing the research.
Cool. Thank you, Steve.
And to answer your question about insurance for directors and officers liability, when we were conducting our research, It's to protect you as an officer in your organization in the event a lawsuit is filed against one of your members.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just in case, and expect the unexpected.
Mm,
And the cost was just, it seems like money well spent, because you just never know. We live in a pretty litigious society, and as we were investigating it and talking to a couple of different insurance carriers, we thought it was a good idea and prudent at the time. So we went ahead and
yeah.
purchased the insurance.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Thank you.
Excellent. Great question. So we have a question in the Q&A section, and let me read that for the panel. What advice do you have for increasing institutional diversity among the exec board and committee members? In my experience, volunteers for these positions come about from people existing board members know and might not reach the widest variety of membership.
That's a very good question, and it can be challenging for a lot of associations. I think the thing to do is to try to make sure that your committee, your nominations and elections committee, is as diverse as possible. For some organizations, we've seen they have a relatively small nominating committee where it might only be 3 or 4 members. So you might think about expanding that and having more members so that you can have a more diverse committee. And I think it's important to point out the different facets of diversity, right? So we may think of diversity as being gender diversity or racial diversity, but we also need to think about the type of institutions we serve as well. So you want to make sure there's somebody on there from a community college as well as from a private school, someone from small schools, someone from large schools, someone from the registrar world, and somebody from admissions as well. So I think the best way to get nominees for these for the board positions that are diverse are to make sure you have a diverse committee.
And to piggyback on what Steve said, it's all about being intentional. I remember when we first founded AACRAO, it went a 4-year public, a 4-year private, and community college. And Steve was very intentional about making sure that we had that representation of different types of institutions. So I think that when you have different types of institutions represented, that hopefully starts the board becoming more diverse, and different issues are going to be addressed with people coming from different institutions. That's a really good start. And then I think the rest just kind of continues to come on, and you do see more diversity come on board.
And I'm not on the committee, obviously, but from the AACRAO side of things, I've helped run the elections, and I've been pretty close to the nominations and elections process. And I want to echo what Carol and Steve said, along with the idea that sometimes you have to be very intentional about recruiting, and sometimes that's the role of that committee, is to look at where your blind spots are, where you're not diverse on the board currently, and then recruiting people within your association and really encouraging them to make the leap to volunteer at that leadership level. And that's one of the reasons why, at least on ours, the past president of the board is a sitting member, a non-voting member anyway of the NNE, is just to inform the NNE committee about where those needs might be, so that they can factor that into their own selection process.
Okay, great. We have a couple more questions on the Q&A. Do you know of a way to obtain tax exempt without having a charter? Our original charter is lost. Or I guess it's saying our original charter is lost.
That's a really good question. If I remember correctly, because I'm fortunate to have Steve in this conversation, because he wrote all that when we found a cap acro. If I remember correctly, don't you have to file that? I mean, at least in the state of Maryland, didn't we file that with the state, or there was some kind of governing body that we had to file it with? So potentially, you
I believe we registered as a corporation, right?
right? Yes. Yeah.
We registered with the state as a corporation, and then we were tax exempt. We had to then file further documentation to get the tax exempt status. And if I remember too, there was a lot of, like, did we get tax exempt status in cap acro, Carol, for both federal and state? Because I know there were two separate processes, and I think the state process was much easier than the federal process.
Yeah. I think initially we had the state exempt, and then about 2 or 3 years into the association, we went ahead and filed for tax exempt status with the federal government. So at least in Maryland, it was a 2-step process that you had to do it in Maryland, and then you had to do it with the federal government. So that's how we went through the process with cap acro. So hopefully, at least depending on where you're located, potentially check with how things are filed in the state to see if you're able to get that charter is where I would first start. And then when you apply for tax exempt status, put in as much information as you can, and potentially a document indicating that we don't have the original charter, but here's the rest of the documentation that you require, and see if that meets the requirements for applying for it, is what I would recommend at that point.
All right, thank you. One more question from the Q&A. Does anyone allow for folks to serve multiple terms in the president role at the state or regional levels, not consecutively, but over time?
So that is an interesting question. We haven't, or at least in my research, I didn't find anything, or not that I remember, that that specifically said people couldn't serve in the same role multiple times. And I don't believe that I've seen anything that said that they couldn't even do it consecutively. I know that I've seen it happen in, for example, for vice presidential roles, I've seen people do that consecutively. Not very often, and maybe only once, but I have seen that happen. As far as president, the only time I know of a few cases of this, and it happened to us at Cap Acro, and I remember it, I believe, happening at Middle States in AACRAO, I think, many years ago. But there was a president that resigned. And in Maryland, in Cap Acro, the reason it happened was because we had a president take office, and shortly after taking office, took a job in another state and had to leave the state. So I guess my recommendation for this is make sure you have something in your bylaws that address what happens if a role vacates like that one did. Luckily, we had that written in our bylaws. So the president-elect, at least in Cap Acro, the president-elect steps into the role of president without prejudice towards their role that they were elected to. So what happened was that president became president and served as president for a year plus. That may or may not be the best way to do it. I don't know. I know that's what's happened. I know of another case, I believe that was AACRAO. I'm trying to remember. The older I get, the organizations all cross in my mind. But I remember that was what happened in that situation as well. The president served for like 1.5 years. I would definitely recommend getting something written in, whether it is that the president appoints a new president-elect, or whether there's a new election that's held, or whether they just serve an extra year after that. You know, I think that needs to be written into the bylaws.
Great. We've had a couple of comments that of people acknowledging that they have also served multiple terms. And as a result of COVID, which I'm sure all of us can imagine, there are strange things happening this year and causing reasons for things to not go as normally as they would. One more question from the Q&A. Does the guide address internal audit policies for financial records? I'm treasurer of state and regional, and we've discussed an annual audit, but haven't implemented anything yet. Any advice?
So we didn't put a section on internal audit policies in my chapter, but I do know in my state and regional and AACRAO, we had what we did is every other year we had an audit, and we had an audit committee. So the committee would review financial records and I believe Ms. AACRAO does this too, because I served on that committee, and Ms. AACRAO, it just reviews the financial statements of the organization. And then I had already left a leadership position with AACRAO by then, but then the understanding was, I think it was I don't know if it was every other year or every 3 years, we would look at finding someone who was a CPA to do a pretty thorough internal audit of the organization, is what I believe was written in, at least in our bylaws.
And I'll add too that the guide in our chapter, in the organizational chapter, it does mention, although briefly, it does mention in the committees section that that it's common to find a budget or an audit committee as well to ensure that the association is fiscally responsible to its members, is the way the guide puts it. But yeah, it is recommended to have an audit committee.
Great, thank you for that. Great questions and great answers. Do we have any more questions? Nobody wants to know what color socks Steve's wearing today? Just me?
I have a question for Steve, I think, about organizational structure, anybody who wants to answer it. Did you find organizations that had like a handbook for their officers to help with what they needed to do when? And were they publicly available to folks? Or do you have, what's your experience with like handbooks and the like for officers?
That's a great question. We didn't find a lot of that, but we did find some. I have to say that when we were creating AACRAO in Maryland and Washington, D.C., we relied a lot on the website of Missouri, because we just simply, I don't know if there's anyone from Missouri on this on the call today, but if so, thank you for having a wonderful website, because I remember as we were looking at that, we found that the size of the schools in Maryland, the numbers of schools were very similar to Missouri. So we used what they had online. So we found that very helpful. There was also another one, I believe it's Kansas, that actually developed a guide the way that you asked, Michelle, that they were developing a guide for their board members. So it had, if I remember correctly, it had a general section for all of the board, and then each board member had a section outlining all of their duties and what they should do. So we found that very helpful. I don't know if they have that online publicly, but it might be worth checking for that. And if not, at least at the time, they seemed very willing to share it if people were interested. So if there's anyone on here from Kansas maybe that could expand upon that. If not, I would suggest that would be a good place to reach out as well.
And I ask because I know in Wisconsin, we have a predecessor put together, the handbook is based on the calendar year. So for every position, for every month, it talks about what the person should be doing. And it's it was such a great reference to have that every once in a while I'd be like, oh wait, I have to do my WACRO tasks. Let me pull out the handbook and see what I'm supposed to be working on this month and make sure that I covered everything from the month before. And it was broken out that way for every type of board position, which was super helpful. And I think April is commenting that that can be used to help explain to people who may be wondering whether they want to volunteer or not, whether it's a manageable workload for them or what it might entail. So I was just curious what others have. So thanks.
One thing, when I was president of CapACRO, we actually, I think it was about a month after we, changed officers, is we had a day where we met, and the person that came out of that position and the new person, and we went around and talked about what the expectations were. And we did have a notebook to pass on to that person to say, this is what you need to know. And like, I kind of call it an operations plan. I like, Michelle, like you said, like each month you're like, uh-oh, it was my, don't forget to do this list. And that was really helpful. I always, I think it's so important to think about succession planning and to make sure that we don't miss anything. And, a lot of us are very comfortable walking into a role and being like, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure it out, OTJ, right? But I tried to get us to the point where we were doing that training. Ideally, what I wanted to do is the day after the annual conference that we had to do the training there. But as we all know, the day after you do a 1 or 2 day conference, you're exhausted, and that probably isn't the best time for training. But I think it's important that outgoing board members know that you got to train that person so they understand what they're doing. Because at CapACRO, it was unique. We went into it creating it as we went along, and I just wanted to pass on to say, okay, this is what you need to do. So that was there for that person, because I know what it was like walking into something and creating it as we went along.
And I'd like to add too that what Carol said about succession planning is so important, because with some of these organizations, especially some that have very few board members, there are some that only have 4 or 5 board members. Sometimes all it takes is one person to get upset and take all the things that were given to them and run away with them, So it's important to have some place where all of this stuff is stored online, or all of this stuff is stored somewhere electronically, so that it's always available to everyone, regardless who may have it or who may forget that they have it. And sometimes it's with the best intentions. I don't want to say people have bad intentions, but sometimes it's with the best intentions that you may get rid of something not thinking you need it. And then 20 years later, somebody says, where's our charter? And we can't find it, like earlier was expressed. So I think that's important. And not to I don't want to put anyone from AACRAO on the spot, but that was something that we talked about in the work group a few times, was we would like to see, if it ever becomes possible, we'd like to see somewhere where maybe AACRAO has something, whether it's on the website or somewhere on the national level, that they have, that local leaders could deposit all of these things, so that there would be one site where we could go and see every state and regional's constitution and bylaws, where we could see any guidebooks that they may have. And maybe we use this guide as a skeleton for that, as a starting point, where each of those sections could be a separate location in this online place, where then people could upload the things they need, the samples of documents that they have, the tax documents and so forth, or their charters. And that way it's there forever. So that's kind of a dream that we on the work group had. That maybe that could happen someday.
Yes, that would be wonderful. I can tell you, as a past chair of state and regional, just trying to find a central, or trying to combine or create a list of all of the officers and board members of all of the different associations is a Herculean task. And Michelle is nodding her head. She knows that as well. It's nearly impossible. It would be wonderful to have that as a resource. Just the names of who they are and which positions, then to have all of their documents would be amazing. So yes, that would be wonderful. Mike Sisson also had a comment earlier that talks a little bit about succession planning, and he made a very good point. It's usually not with the board level positions in any of the associations that they have trouble. It's a lot of times with the committee roles, where things that are less visible or less flashy, where it becomes difficult to find new leaders to jump into those roles. Sometimes because leaders don't want to give up a role, and other times just because nobody wants that role. That's in state and regional, that's always been a challenge. I was super lucky to have an incredible person to come on as the chair of that, as my vice chair, and then now taking over that committee. So, and Michelle has done a great job. Everybody, round of applause for Michelle for really organizing a lot of, most of this conference. This is her baby. So a successful leader is one who finds someone better, smarter, more talented to follow them. So there's to my success in finding the best possible replacement for myself. So yes, one of the tricks is really finding people to step into those roles that that may not be as visible, but there are great people out there who are doing amazing work. So thank you, Mike, for that comment. Do we have any other questions? Any other comments?
Yeah, I would just like to make one last quick comment about about exactly what you're talking about recruiting people in, because I know that it can be difficult at times, recruiting more people to help into committees and leadership. But if too many people get in there and stay, it's the same people changing roles back and forth, then it kind of discourages people from becoming involved, because they see, well, I'm not in that little group, so I'll never get involved. So I would challenge those of us who are in those roles, if we are in the leadership role, when we have our conferences, assuming we'll get to have conferences again and that our schools will pay for us to go, assuming that happens, look for people that you don't know, that may just be sitting alone or sitting in a group of 2 or 3 people. And many of you on this call probably know me, or a lot of my friends that I know are just because I did that. I didn't necessarily travel with people I knew to these conferences. And I'm not shy at all. So I would walk up to a group of 3 people chatting and just jump in and say, hey, this is me. I'd like to meet you. But as we all know, not everyone is like that. So you may see a couple of people just standing off by themselves. Go over to them, because they're there because they may want to be involved. Introduce yourself to them, talk to them, and maybe suggest that they get involved, and or at least see if they're interested, and then suggest ways that maybe they could serve on one of your committees, or if you're an organization that doesn't have a lot of committees, maybe you could think that maybe you could help this person out on this, or you could volunteer at our conference next year. And because even I found that a lot of people who don't want to get involved or don't think they want to get involved will offer to volunteer, or at least be a session moderator, which means all they have to do is introduce the person who's presenting. But the thing is, once they do that, then that introduces them, and then they find that they actually are interested in getting involved. So I would suggest, reaching out to people that you don't even know. When you see them, just walk up to them and introduce yourself.
And I'm living proof that Steve does do that, because I never would have even thought of becoming president of AACRAO had he not been like, Carol, we really need somebody from a community college, and can we put your name up? And I was like, me? Really? So I think people just don't think that they know enough to lead an organization, but they really do. They just need encouragement and for someone to say, you can do this. So reaching out is totally important. And that also, I think, goes back to intentionally going and getting a diverse group to lead your organization.
And I point out too, Chris mentions in the chat that Chris Wong from Illinois mentions that at AACRAO they do the same thing. They or they don't do the same. They ask on their registration if you would like to be involved. And I can say that I've done this in a lot of different organizations that I've been a member of, not only through AACRAO and through my profession, but a lot of organizations. I've checked that box and then either received one email with no follow-up or never heard anything. So I think that by doing this, that's a good first step, but make sure you follow through. And I think that that a good way to follow through, you know, when we go to our when we go to our conferences, we have our name tags with our name very big at the top. I think a good way to do this would be to assign people to follow up, to look for those people, right? We have these 10 people that have put on their registration form that they would like to be involved. Let's go talk to them and find out how we can get involved, because that in-person touch means so that you know, that in-person or I guess now over Zoom, but if we single somebody out and give them some attention, that really helps go a long way.
Right, I agree, and I think one of the things that as leaders, and I would imagine all of us are in some sort of a leadership role to be on this conference at all, but just to help new leaders know that anytime you go into a new position, you're not expected to know everything about that position. That's kind of the point. You come into a new role and you learn it. And so it's not that you have to wait until you know everything before you can take on a leadership role in one of these positions. And so just encouraging people who may not have stepped forward that they can do it, and we're here to help you do that and help you be successful in that new role, just so that they feel more comfortable about jumping into that. Because a lot of times they just won't volunteer because they don't feel like they're ready when they're totally capable, and just, you know, are just a little self-conscious. The other thing is, as leaders, I always think of leadership as kind of like Kung Fu. I studied Kung Fu for a while, and in Kung Fu, the thing is, leaders develop other leaders. So Kung Fu masters develop other Kung Fu masters, and there becomes this genealogy of leadership, right? So, you know, I studied under Master Tucson, and he studied under Master Gross, and, you know, it goes through all these different Sifus up through history, up to, you know, going into China. If we think about that ourselves as being leaders in these roles, we are not trying to be the person in a position forever, or to rotate through all the positions. We are trying to create additional leaders, more leaders. And so we're creating that genealogy of leadership. And I think if we come at it that way, it's more like the more successful leader is the one who creates more leaders, not the one who's been in more leadership positions, but the one who, it's like, you know, he who dies with the most leaders they created wins, right? So think about it that way, and it kind of encourages us to really seek out more leaders that we can develop.
Well, I have a bit to share about Wisconsin. We went through something last year with our executive committee membership or board membership that comes back to this. We had a number of positions like the newsletter editor and the member services coordinator and the vendor relations person, and I think there was one other one, and they were non-voting members, and it always felt wrong to me that we would have these long discussions, we would debate how we were going to do certain things, and then at the end of the discussion they wouldn't vote. And, you know, they were at the table around us providing information, spending their days with us and their valuable time, you know, just like everybody else. And I said, these people should be voting members, just like the president and the president-elect and the past president and the treasurer and secretary. And so we changed our bylaws to allow those folks to be voting members, which I think was a good thing. and then in the process was like, okay, well, if they're voting members, then we need to give them rotations like the other elected members. And then we need to find people to replace them. So now we have 4 more people that we need to find replacements for, which can be a challenge because it can be hard to find volunteers. But at the same time, it's a benefit for the organization because it provides an opportunity for people to get involved that otherwise would not have. So that was the biggest benefit in my opinion. You know, like you meet people at conferences and, you know, they're like, I don't know how to get started. I don't know what to do. And, you know, being the membership services coordinator sounds manageable, right? And it brings new people in. And I think that was, I'm glad that we did that in the hopes of trying to get more people involved in the officer level. So to share.
That's an excellent point, Michelle, because I've seen that happen before. Even in AACRAO, we were trying very hard to get people to run for board positions, and we realized what we need to do, you know, is to get, because if the board turns over, or if people are coming off the board and none of the people coming off the board want to run for president, what do you have? Well, if you have somebody who is the chair of your program committee, that person might possibly be ready for that, or someone so I think it's important to have to create those other smaller roles and to get people involved in committees, because you may think, oh, everything is run by the board, we don't need committees, or we don't have the capacity to have committees. But I think you do. I think everyone does and does have a need for that. If nothing else, to get people involved in something that they can handle, so that they get that taste of what it's like to be a leader in the organization, and then they can step into those roles when you have vacancies on your board, or when you're ready to run for those offices. You have people that are available.
Oh yeah, those committee roles are very important, I think. A lot of, you know, the newsletter person and the member services person was probably a committee member at one point for one of the subcommittees for the conference. We probably all were in our structure anyway. You know, you start as a committee member and then a committee chair, and then, you know, maybe onto the board.
All right, we have one more question from the Q&A section. It says, is there a president's or other role leadership meeting, program, forum, chat and chew? Would AACRAO be willing to host this type of program annually that can connect presidents? I happen to know one group that connects presidents and board members for all the state and regional committees. So I'm going to pass it over to Michelle and let her talk about that one.
Well, that is this organization, the State and Regional Relations Committee, and this is what this virtual leadership discussion is about, to try to bring people together. So yes, I'm the acting chair of the committee, and this series of workshops is an attempt to accomplish just that. Am I getting to the crux of the question? The hard part is really beyond these workshops, what do people want to hear, and how do they want to hear it, and how do we bring people together? It's a wonderful idea. In practice, in making it happen is a little bit more challenging than how easy it sounds. Texas, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. Right now, especially with COVID, it's challenging just to get participation. So with state and regional, one of the challenges has always been just having people participate. And the more we can have board members of all the associations participate and communicate, the stronger it is. So we do have that. It is very challenging right now, especially. So this is a great way for us to do that, is to have these types of meetings but also, participate with the committee. We have some people who are on the committee that are not very active. Historically, that's been the case. I think now we have a committee that's much more active. But it's been challenging to have people participate even as part of the committee. So yes, we have this. I would just encourage everyone to participate and really communicate with each other. There's so much great information. Each association does things a little bit differently. The guide is wonderful because it kind of consolidates all of those ideas, but we gain new ideas from those communications together as a group. The roundtables for the state and regional at the annual conference are the thing that I think everyone loves the most, because it just sparks so many new ideas, or oh, I didn't know you did it that way. That's a great idea. I can take that back to my organization and do that. So that's the benefit of this group, the State and Regional Relations Committee. So yes, if you want to be more involved, please contact Michelle. She would love to have your involvement.
Yes. And I think maybe after these workshops are over, what I might do is send a communication to all those who attended, in addition to the AACRAO list of current presidents and president-elects, which is as close as they can get to accurate, and try to just ask people what they thought of the workshops and what we might be able to try to facilitate going forward. I know that there's a Facebook group and a listserv that we could be using. So I'll try to facilitate any events or activities or anything that we want to do. And I know that AACRAO is there to assist as well. I am planning on, I don't know what's going to happen with the annual meeting and how things are going to look. But our thought has been that we would take this virtual conversation of these 3 workshops and take it into the roundtable mode at sessions at the annual meeting as well. Because I think these discussions, every time they happen, they take a different twist because everybody has different experiences and different ideas. So they're not repetitious by any means, I don't think. So we're planning on having this type of discussion again at the annual meeting for future reference. So you'll be hearing from me again after the workshops.
And I think one good thing about all of that can come out of all of this, right, is that we all know how to use Zoom now, and this will become, I think, very helpful to state and regionals to have these kind of meetings, not only at the annual meeting, not only the leadership meeting, but to continue to do a Zoom type meeting, because as we've learned while doing this research, many of the people who get involved as presidents and vice presidents and in all the leadership roles of the state and organizations, many of them aren't permitted to be a member of AACRAO, of the National Association. Because a lot of what we found was a lot of schools would send possibly their upper leadership of the offices to the National Association, and then their assistant registrars or associate registrars or veterans coordinators or transfer coordinators might not be permitted, or they may just not have the money to attend the National Association, and they go to the state regionals. So if that happens and they're not members of the National Association, they quite often miss the communications that come from the National Association about the state and regional activities. So I think by, and since they're not able to attend the National Association, they can't do those breakout sessions or attend those roundtables that are so important, as Texas and Michelle have both said. So I think by doing those things in coordination with Zoom, having it in person and Zoom, will allow more and more people to be able to participate. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and this is Michelle again. I see some questions and comments going through, and Mike, I hope you don't mind if I speak for you a little bit in AACRAO, but Yes, AACRAO does have a list of the presidents and president-elects of the state and regional associations, but I've known for some time that it's not always 100% complete, and in my role as chair, I'm learning to understand a little bit better why. I mean, it is very hard to keep it up to date, and there, as Mike says in one of the things that he's typing, that they're really at the mercy of the state and regional organizations to let them know or have their information on their websites, or it's just harder than it sounds to have a list. And then somebody asks about why it's limited to the president and vice president of the organizations. And I don't think it's so much that it's limited to them, but it's hard enough with just them, and trying to expand it to the entire boards would be very hard to keep up with all the information. So I know that if I were in AACRAO's position, I would want to have two key people, you know, the president and president-elect in each organization, and then rely on them to spread the word of the information that they're sharing. So I wouldn't want it to look at like being limited to. And I just, one more thing, just real quick, that's the benefit of these virtual workshops. You know, when this happens in Washington, D.C., it's so cost prohibitive for folks to be able to go, that these we purposefully tried to have it open to all executive committee or board members to be able to spread the wealth and the fun, as it were. It is for us, but really to have more people involved, because it is so good to be able to just talk like this amongst our friends. So.
And Michelle, I just would add or ask, actually, the conference or the annual meeting of the leadership of the state and regional associations, that's not limited to president and president-elect, right? That's open to the state and regional to send whomever they like, because I know in AACRAO we sent the treasurer
Yes, true.
a couple of times because we thought it was important for them to hear some of the stuff that's talked about.
Yes,
Yep, right.
I think you are correct. Yes.
Yeah, for both the leadership meeting, which unfortunately we had to cancel this year, hopefully we can do next year, and for the annual meeting, that invite is, as Michelle said, it's open to everybody. It's just that sometimes for expense reasons, it's not feasible to send anybody, but maybe one individual. And you've also accurately summed up the reasons why we don't maintain a full list of all of the executive leadership for all of the state and regional organizations. However, I did want to just mention or plug really quickly, you know, if you've been involved at all, we do offer basically at this point, it is a free membership software solution through MemberClicks. And if you are on that platform, it's much easier for us to actually kind of maintain that list. We don't have direct access to your membership roster, but it's much easier for us to request that information and for whoever has access at that point in time to the MemberClicks platform to just download a list of anybody that's flagged as an executive. Some of the issues I think right now is as Carol, or actually this might be in a different video for a future workshop, but not everybody has a very good solution for membership management. Sometimes it's in Excel spreadsheets, and that can complicate keeping it current even for themselves, let alone for us.
And I think this would be a good point too, to point out that Mike has posted the link to the AACRAO listserv, to the state and regional listserv in the chat. So I would suggest everyone join that if you haven't done so already. And also, if you're, like Michelle mentioned, the Facebook group, if you're a Facebook person like I am, follow that state and regional Facebook page, because things are posted there, and I do see people posting questions, and it's a good way to communicate with others that are doing the same thing as you are in other states.
All right, great questions, everyone. Do we have any more questions, comments?
I would like to just go back. When I scroll back through the comments that were made, I saw that Chris mentioned something about a vendor booth. So it made me, I do want to ask him, if he's still on, what he means by the vendor booth, or an AACRAO booth with vendors at the annual conference. But I wanted to talk a little bit about sponsorships as well, because we touch on that in the guide and just barely touched on it in my video. But for those of us that depend very heavily on sponsorships, and it's interesting too, we found some states rely almost completely on money from sponsorships, and some states don't even have vendors come to their conferences, so they don't even have really much input at all from vendors. So I would like to say that was something that, at least for us at AACRAO, it was the only thing really that enabled us to have the nice conference that we had. And what I found was that the nicer the conference, the more vendors wanted to participate, and they wanted to get you on their list so that they made sure that they were able to come to your conference because it was a good experience for them. And one of the things that we did that I don't know if anyone else does, since we had so much money coming in from them, we wanted to actually say thank you to them. So we told all of our vendors, if you're coming in the night before the conference, let us know, let us take you out to dinner. So our board took the vendors out and treated them to dinner the night before the conference. And we had one of the vendors, so one of our corporate partners said to us that night, he said, you know, I've been doing this for a lot of years through several companies, and this is the first time, he said, and I've bought a lot of dinners, but this is the first time anyone's ever bought me a dinner. So those kind of things, you know, to reach out to those corporate sponsors and treat them well, because they can be very important.
Hey, Steve, this is Chris. I'm still here. Yeah, essentially we do have vendors. And so we just put up a booth at AACRAO, and it's just kind of like what is the board positions. And we usually have it staffed during breaks and stuff like that at the annual meeting. And it's just a nice way for people, they can, you know, come by, ask questions of what is the board, or ask questions of AACRAO. And if they want to get involved, that's been a kind of recruiting tool. And sometimes we've also had a session at the annual conference as well, just to talk about how to get involved with AACRAO. So that's kind of essentially, we just have a booth, I guess, amongst where we have our vendors, you know, at the annual meeting, at our annual conference. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I see. So you're saying that you had your board members set up a booth in the vendor area to actually try to recruit, or at least spread the word about what you do.
Right.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's a great idea. We have one more question in the Q&A. Would AACRAO consider using Slack as another option for connecting members and creating community? I think that may be a mic session question there.
Yeah, so we do use Slack for internal communication, and I guess the short answer is that we had not considered opening it up previously. It's something that we can definitely bring up with our IT team and with the executives. So I'm sure it probably wouldn't be very difficult to just create a channel and then grant access to anybody that might want it. I think it's just like a standing invite link as far as I'm aware, although you might have to be explicitly invited. So the logistics around it might complicate things, but it's certainly something that we can consider, and we can follow back up with the state and regional group.
Yes, and try saying "sisson" and "question" together, and see if you don't get tongue-tied.
Lots of S's, I know.
We did have another question, and thank you, Chris, for bringing it to my attention. There was a question that came up about fees or not charging fees due to COVID. I'm not sure who would want to take that one. So with the associations in the meetings.
I'm not sure. I think that that's a good question. I think that might be a good question for, not for us to answer, but for the participants to answer if anyone has dealt with that or has addressed that, because I haven't heard of any of that yet, but I know that it's a challenge because a lot of our schools are freezing our budgets.
Yeah, I think I know the answer for Wisconsin for ours. We're having a much smaller, condensed virtual workshop, and I don't think we're planning on charging folks for it. And we always have charged for our annual conference. And I think we might be discussing whether we will be charging fees at all to the institutions, the annual fee for being a member at our next meeting, because we don't feel like with all of the craziness that's been going on, we don't know that we feel like we've really provided enough service and value to have them pay right now. Right? So just.
Yeah, I can chime in too a little bit. I've talked to a couple of different leaders in different associations who've made decisions not to charge a fee, and one of the reasons that they're able to do that is because they haven't had any expenses, because they haven't done the face-to-face things, and so they actually have money that they haven't spent that they can use to kind of offset the cost of some of that right now. So it's a unique to COVID type of a situation, but those are the conversations I've had.
This is Elise from Middle States, Missouri. We are still charging dues, but I have to say that the dues is significantly lower than in the past. But we are having a modified virtual conference, which we are opening it up to anybody that was a member or is not a member, but is still in our region.
And it's interesting to see what's coming through on the chat. For those who haven't read it, that several are in the same boat there. AACRAO isn't charging for the annual conference, but they are still charging dues, they think. UMACRO is doing a virtual conference with no fee, and Michigan ACRAO, is having an annual conference that's virtual, being provided at no cost. But they actually, Tom says that they actually are not charging renewal. If you were a member from 2020, they're renewing you at 2021 with no charge. So, so I think this is the proof, right, of how important it is to have to be able to have contact with the people in other states. So once again, I encourage the listserv, because I think this would be an excellent question to put out on the listserv, just to say, hey, what is everyone doing? Because that's something, it's so recent, right? We don't have any precedent for it.
And bringing up the virtual conferences and the like, I'll just put a plug in for one of the workshops coming up is about conference planning. And in our discussions in the creation of that workshop, the question of the virtual, what people are doing this year and what has changed with the virtual world and things, that's going to be a significant component of that workshop. So if you're able to attend, please join, or please forward the information to anybody in your organization that you think would find it helpful. I'm really looking forward to that discussion. So, yep, October 14th. Mike put the link out there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for adding those links. All right, are there any other questions? Any other discussion? This has been great, really great questions. We still don't know what color socks Steve's wearing, by the way.
Unfortunately, now that I'm at home, they're white. and sometimes I don't wear any socks at work.
Nobody asked, but I'm wearing slippers.
Oh, there you go. Thank you, Mike. Mine you can't see, but they're guitars.
Oh, wow.
One of my addictions, other than socks.
So yeah, I think that this is great, and yeah, I would encourage everyone to continue this conversation at the come back for the other workshops. Can get on that listserv so you'll know when the meetings are and how to get in contact with other people that are doing the same things at other state and regionals. I think that this is exactly why AACRAO was formed.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that kind of wraps it up, folks. We ended a little bit early, but I think we had a good conversation there, and we hope you all found it useful. And with that, I think we can sign off. Sound good?
Yeah.
Right, another round of applause for Michelle and Mike and Steve and Carol for their great work
And Tex.
presenting and organizing all of this.
Yep.
Good job. This was great. Thank you so much.
And someday we'll see each other again in person. We will.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Mike
all.
and Anetta.